Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session today. My name is Aarti Khosla. Those of you who haven't met me, I work with a global communications program called the Global Strategic Communications Council. Today, I'm representing ICIMOD and climate trends for the host of this webinar. I also represent Climate Trends, and that's an agency that we founded a couple of years ago. I can hear a lot of echo, but I'm not sure if others can hear it as well. I'm only assuming it will settle for itself. But given that we have a really esteemed panel and some expert speakers from across the world, before I actually go on into even defining what we're wanting to discuss at this session, I want to welcome each one of you to this meeting, and also for the benefit of all our attendees, I do want to welcome each one of you. We have Dr. Pema Gamsho, who's the Director General and heads ICIMOD. We have Dr. Daniel Greenbaum, who's the President of Health Effects Institute. We have Professor S. M. Tripathi, who's the Professor and Head of Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Kanpur. We have Ms. Saida Rizwana Hassan, who's a lawyer and Chief Executive of Bangladesh Environmental Lawyer Association and is based out of Dhaka. We also have Dr. Mahesh Paketi, who's the Scientific Project Leader at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies at Potsdam. We have Dr. James Shore, who's a professor at Civil and Environmental Engineering in the University of Wisconsin. And we have Linda Katarina, who's the Deputy Executive Director of Clean Air Asia. Last but not the least, we also have my co-moderator with me, fondly known as IC, Dr. Iqbal Mead, who's the ICIMOD Regional Program Manager for Atmosphere. Thank you once again for joining us. Let me also say that we try to put the session into two parts. We have Pema and Dan, who will talk about the problem and define the challenges that exist on air quality management. And then we have the second part of the panel where IC will take over and will essentially try and work with the panelists to discuss what could be the possible solutions and essentially the conversation around what is it that the South Asian countries can learn from each other, either in terms of micro models for air quality management, in terms of what has worked and what hasn't, or what is it that in future could lie either in terms of technology or in terms of political will, or even in terms of just coming together along with each other on best practices and interventions. Coming back to the discussion about air pollution, I am the least qualified to do this in front of the panel that we have in front of us. But given our limited intervention as a campaign perspective on air quality, the observation has been that enough has been discussed about air pollution, and my perspective is fairly Indian, yet the interventions have remained ad hoc as well as the measures have been sporadic. We work a lot with media and journalists, and the general tone is that although public and media attention has grown, but it is at best still seasonal. And therefore, I'm only underlining that our intention in organizing this kind of a session has mostly been to stir a conversation about what are the successful models of reducing air pollution, which can either be learned by South Asian countries, seeing what has worked between each other, or what is it that can come from other parts of the world in terms of how the recipient countries have tackled air pollution when really the sources have been elsewhere. The other point that also came out in discussions with most of you when we were curating this session was basically about the fact that while transboundary is a problem, it indeed is a limited problem, and there is major chunk of conversation that should be had about local sources, again, like transport industry, solid cooking, whatever they may be. But are there examples in other countries where they were tackled very well domestically, where polluting sources are at source, and what is the way to bring down in country pollution levels? Certainly, this is as good as time as any other moment, and maybe better or worse. I mean, look at the weather. But the reality is that, especially, how some of the news reports have started to link air quality with also the decrease in southwest monsoons. Certain studies have been coming around which actually talk of a rainfall reduction of 10 to 15% for India, which could be happening due to air pollution. Now, these kind of things are serious, and as one of the chief ministers, Aditya Thackeray, for those of you who don't know, India's state of Maharashtra, wrote an opinion piece and talked about monsoons and basically said they are the finance minister of India. So the reality is that a lot depends on how the monsoon is and the impact of the the big weather system that can happen on countries cannot be lessened. But the fact that air pollution is also playing into it certainly adds another layer of complexity, which is hard to fathom, given that countries have not been able to even deal with bringing down pollution by a certain percentage, given that we had national programs to deal with air quality and so on and so forth. Like I said, I'm not the best person to talk about this from an Indian side. There are enough experts. We have Professor Tripathi, who's at the helm of affairs and will share some insights. But essentially, that's the purpose of why we are holding this session, and I wanted to lay the context from our point of view. Like I said, when we had not begun, just for everybody's reference, this is a session which is on record. Most of what all of what the speakers will say can be quoted by journalists who are also attending this meeting. If there is anything that you would not like to be quoted, don't say it. In any case, I would request the journalists as well to please double check with the panelists before you publish the story, if that be the case. And we'd really appreciate just you checking with the experts once before you are quoting them. We are also recording this session, and a Zoom recording with a link and password will be shared with definitely with the panelists. But if attendees also want it, we can put it up and you can access it. Some speakers will talk through a presentation. We will also compile all the presentations together, and we will put it up for everybody who is attending to share. May I, at this moment, pause, and I will invite Pema from ICIMOD to please give the opening remarks, define the problem statement for us, and share us in the session. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me, Arti?
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much, Arti. I think you have articulated all the things that I wanted to share also. But good afternoon from Kathmandu and good morning to some of you. Maybe still very early, but I'm very happy to join Dr. Daniel Greenbaum, President of the Health Effects Institute, to highlight some of the issues that our region is facing with regards to air pollution. We have also, as you mentioned, a very eminent lineup of panelists, and I am sure they would actually deal much more with many of the challenges, the issues that we are facing. I'm also glad to see so many participants attending this.
Dr. Gyamshu,
Yeah.
Sir, your audio is a bit low.
Right, okay. So let me try. Is it better? Is it better now?
Still the same?
Works for me. Gunjan actually works for me.
Actually, everybody else is messaging.
Is it better now? Is it better?
Yes, please go ahead.
Still same? Okay, I'll try to speak a little louder.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me start by welcoming all of you on behalf of ICIMOD to this very important discussion on opportunities for addressing air pollution in South Asia. At the outset, I would also like to thank our partner, Climate Trends, for co-hosting this event, and of course, to all the distinguished panelists for giving their valuable time to discuss this topical issue of our times. Ladies and gentlemen, the way we understand and interact with the environment is changing at all scales, globally, nationally, locally, and even individually. We are beginning to understand that the atmosphere does not recognize or respect artificial thresholds and is a transboundary issue. This is reflected in a heightened government, scientific, and public interest in the problem, its causes and impacts, as well as mitigation options. Hence, this panel discussion is very timely and, yes, hopefully, a game changing one. The Hindu Kush Himalayan region, extending from Afghanistan to the west and Myanmar to the east, is increasingly at the receiving end of climate change impacts. referred to as the third pole or the water towers of Asia. It supports more than two-thirds of the world's population uh, through its ecosystem services, primarily water. It is a global asset that is increasingly coming under threat from climate change and socio-economic drivers. One of the major causes of rapid melting of snow and ice in the Hindu Kush Himalayan mountains is attributed to the increasing deposits of black carbon and dust particles on the snow-capped mountains and ice-bound glaciers, often from sources outside the mountain regions. More direct consequences of air pollution, but often less talked about, is the impact on health of people and not to forget other life forms, including animals and insects and so on and so forth. We talk about it when we have really bad days, as we experienced early this year, and when our senses are impaired and we either find it difficult to breathe or see, or when events like forest fire occur near us and threatens our neighborhood. But then we conveniently forget as soon as the situation improves. Air pollution is considered the fifth leading risk factor for mortality in the world. An estimated 9 out of 10 people worldwide are exposed to air pollutants exceeding World Health Organization's air quality guidelines. I'm sure we will hear much more on this from Dr. Daniel Greenbaum. All I want to say at this stage is that pollutants have reached alarming levels in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region, threatening the health of millions in the region, particularly women, children, the elderly, and the poor. Air pollution not only impacts climate change, the environment, and human health, but also, as you know, the economy of our countries. We have seen shutdowns and lockdowns in several of our cities due to dangerous levels of air pollution affecting daily economic activities. Poor air quality index and the myriad consequences of it are becoming increasingly common across the Hindu Kush Himalayas. Recent studies indicate that South Asia is a pollution hotspot. This becomes even more alarming for us in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. At ICIMOD, we consider the region as the pulse of the planet, since what happens here at the top of the world is an indication of the overall health of the planet. So then, what are the major sources of air pollutants? Major regional sources of air pollutants include cooking, transport, power generation, industries, heating, rubbish burning, agriculture practice, land clearance, and forest fires. All these occur within an atmospherically turbulent region, and we never know which direction the winds will carry them. Some specific sources are noted to be household emissions from biomass cook stoves, open burning of agricultural residues and solid waste, forest fires, vehicles, industries, brick kilns, and fossil fuel-based combustion. Pollutant sources can be local or distant, indoor or outdoor, large or small, have different compositions, have different atmospheric lifetimes, and have varying behaviors in time and experience a range of interactions with meteorology. For example, burning is an important driver in reduced air quality across the HKH and is linked to traditional farming practices and forest fires. Biomass burning and regional haze episodes are especially and seasonally highly variable and can be extensive. Fortunately, we also see mountains of opportunities to address the problem through research, policy, and practical interventions. Air pollution issues have now caught the attention of the general public, policymakers, and researchers, as we are seeing today at this event. It is, however, a complex problem requiring coordination, cooperation, and innovation from a range of stakeholders. Mitigating air pollutants can help address the risk of climate change, increase agricultural productivity, protect human, animal, and environmental health, and minimize regional impacts such as accelerated glacier melt. ICIMOD is committed to support our regional member countries and work with partners from the region and outside to address air pollution and has a dedicated program on atmosphere that my colleague Dr. Iqbal Meet is coordinating. Through this program, we are setting up air quality monitoring stations and carrying out assessment studies on local air quality, such as at the historic site of Lumbini, the birthplace of Lord Buddha. ICIMOD is also currently working with partners in Nepal and Pakistan to reduce emissions from brick kilns by converting from traditional methods to zigzag technology. This is yielding good results by way of reducing emissions, improving quality of brick, and also enhancing profitability. The uptake of the technology by the industry is very encouraging, and the respective governments are fully backing up this transition through appropriate policy interventions. But we know that much more needs to be done. We need to look at other industries, agriculture, debris, and solid waste burning, wildfires, transport, and construction sectors as well. To start with, we need to acknowledge that air pollution is a transboundary issue. Carbon and particulate emissions do not stop within the airspace of a locality or a country. The consequences of toxic air on human health are not confined to people living within a locality or national boundaries. Likewise, the glacial lake outburst floods block that we are experiencing as a result of rapid melting of snow and ice do not stop within the confines of the mountains, but affects huge number of people living in downstream areas. We must also acknowledge that we need to take a holistic approach, recognizing the nexus that exists between air and climate change, environment, health, economy, and livelihoods. To conclude, there is no alternative than to work together to consider air quality at local, regional, and global levels. We know that this is inconvenient and challenging, but if we are to improve our environment and indeed climate outlook in general, now and for future generations, this inconvenient complexity is what we need to unlock. I am sure that today's discussions will be stimulating and that we will lay the foundations for a more robust engagement and cooperation in this very important field. If we are to give meaning to limiting global temperature increases to below 1.5 degrees Celsius at the turn of the century, then we must walk the talk by taking urgent actions to reduce emissions and improve air quality at all levels. We know that for the HKH region, even a 1.5-degree world will be too hot. Thank you, and over to you, Arti. I'm finished.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks very much, Dr. Bhima. You said a lot of things. Let me not paraphrase them, but I think is 1.5 for the world might actually mean it's happened for this region that we are talking about. Anyway, that's a different concept. But you also, talked about the Hindu Kush region being the pulse of the planet, so to speak, and it's pretty clear with all the impacts that are happening. The pulse is quite abnormally fluttering, and air pollution is one of the reasons for it. May I invite you, Dr. Daniel Greenbaum, to talk a little bit? You have done the extensive reports on the state of global air, and there is enough research that your organization has done in terms of what are the impacts on health that the population living in South Asia is facing. What is your view of the situation? Also, given that air pollution is still not recognized as a risk factor politically, it is recognized to a slightly greater degree than a couple of years ago, but it also needs further acknowledgement, and there is no harm in underlining the risk to our decision makers. What is your view of the health impacts and the severity with which it is taken or not?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm going to try and pull up my slides and hopefully can share with you some insights on this very important topic. And hopefully you can all see the slides.
Yes.
Correct. Well, first of all, I'm very, very pleased to this afternoon for most of you to join this meeting organized by two organizations who I have the highest respect for. ICIMOD has done incredible work working across multiple countries on many, many topics, and this being one of them, and climate trends, trying to bring attention to the climate aspects of this. So I'm very pleased to do that. And secondly, I would, while I will be speaking about the health burdens relating to air pollution, I will remind those of you who don't know that I myself was a local air official in the United States, having to deal with the problems of source apportionment, identifying where the problems are, and the challenging process of getting new actions into place. And the one thing I really am excited about today's session is we always understood that air pollution does not recognize political boundaries. So the need for regional approaches to this, for transboundary pollution and other things, is essential. So I'm really happy to be able to spend a little time with you talking about one key component of that, the health burdens, what we know about the health burdens of air pollution in South Asia. I think many of our viewers know the Health Effects Institute, but very briefly, we have been around for 40 years. We've conducted over 350 studies on a wide variety of air pollutants, as well as reviews of specific sources. We have a major review coming out early next year on the health effects of exposure to traffic. And globally, we've worked with scientists in over 30 countries, and as I will talk about today, each year publish the State of Global Air. The State of Global Air is an annual report, and it's also a website where we produce all of the latest exposure and health data easily available for download. It's something we've done jointly for a number of years now with the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, the people who bring us the annual global burden of disease. So let's start with, first of all, what we know about global exposure to air pollution, and Dr. Pema already began to talk about this. It's not simple always to figure out exactly what people are exposed to. We obviously have to have monitors, and that's a very important part of that. More recently, we've found we can use satellite data, transport models, and other mechanisms to try and estimate what the levels are for every corner of every country. And not surprisingly to most of you here, we see that the levels in the world are highest in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And the highest PM 2.5 or fine particle exposures can be found in South Asia, where the annual average is at approximately 78 micrograms per cubic meter. As Dr. Pema noted, over 90% of the world's population live in areas which exceed the World Health Organization air quality guidelines. And unfortunately, it is 100% of the population in South Asia who are in areas exceeding those guidelines. The trends are also important to watch, and ground level fine particles across South Asia remain high. And in the last 10 years, there's been a measurable increase overall in PM 2.5 across India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And in South Asia, the household air pollution contributes to 61% of the exposures, and a very serious source. However, there is some good news about household air pollution. If we look across the globe and in South Asia, the exposures to household air pollution have been falling steadily as more people adopt cleaner fuels. And also health impacts are declining. For example, in India, we estimate that compared to 2010, some 5 crore fewer people are exposed to household air pollution levels than were just 10 years ago. Well, given that quick background, what do we know about the health effects of air pollution? We have conducted studies across the world over a number of years. There's been a long-standing concern, understandably, about the effects of air pollution on the lung, but there is a growing and stronger evidence of an association between both long and short-term exposure to air pollution and heart disease and potential brain disease and cognitive development, and asthma and birth outcomes. And I'll speak to some of that a bit further. And while the early studies here were done in places like Europe and the United States, there is growing evidence by local scientists in India, China, and elsewhere in Asia. What do these mean for public health? Well, the State of Global Air, as I said earlier, comes out each year. We're currently preparing the 2021 report for release later this fall. This last year was based on the annual global burden of disease for 2019. We make available the data, all the data on air pollution and health for every country in the world, and with trends going back to 1970. Estimating exposure, as I said, for the world as a whole is a difficult but doable thing to do, where we very carefully estimate exposure using monitors, models, satellite data combined. We then look at the evidence for each of a number of health outcomes, lung effects, heart effects, effects on stroke, and then we come up with an estimate of just what is the global burden of disease attributable to air pollution. That enables us to actually compare air pollution to other important risks. And right now, we would estimate that air pollution is the fourth leading risk factor for premature death and disability in the globe, contributing to about 12% of global deaths. Some on a global basis, like tobacco and dietary risks, are higher. Others, like malnutrition and alcohol use, are considerably lower. When we turn to South Asia, those rankings change. And what we've seen is air pollution has become an increasingly important risk factor, currently estimated to be the highest risk factor for mortality and other health impacts compared to all other carefully estimated effects. Where are the effects felt? Well, children and the elderly are the most affected. It's perhaps not surprising to know that those who are older and frailer may be more affected, but we have increasing evidence as well of the effects on children. And this last year, we, for the first time, were able to estimate the sad fact that air pollution in 2019 contributed to nearly 500,000 deaths globally among infants in their first month of life. That's 20% of newborn deaths that could be linked to air pollution. The highest infant death impacts are in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. And in India, for example, more than 1 lakh infants died in the first month after birth due to exposure to air pollution. The real theme of today's event is how to address this problem. And I'm looking forward to hearing from the experts in the panel about steps that could be taken. I did want to share, this picture is well known to everybody on this webinar. Many sources, many challenging sources of air pollution. And some actions starting to be taken. One example, of course, is the Indian National Clean Air Program, with the leapfrog to better fuels in vehicles, with thermal power plant rules, with the Ujjwala Yojana program that has really started to reduce the exposure to household air pollution. But what we see is that South Asia still has a markedly higher level of air pollution than the rest of the world. And the levels of pollution have barely changed over the last decade. They are still as high today. They are still higher today than they were in 2010. What can we do about this? Well, one of the things that we at HEI are doing is we've supported a very extensive program of analysis, modeling, estimation called the Global Burden of Disease from Major Air Pollution Sources, or GBD MAPS. It's identifying which sources and sectors contribute most to air pollution and health in 195 countries across the world. And the first results of this were published in a journal earlier this summer. The full data will be available downloadable for each country through the State of Global Air 2021, as I said, this fall. And what we're finding is there are differences across the world about which are the most important sources. This tool will allow everybody to understand not just what are the most important sources, and we have some excellent experts on source apportionment on this webinar, and they know this as well, if not better than anybody at HEI does. But it also allows us to focus in, for example, to focus in on what the health burdens are most attributable to. Not surprisingly, residential energy, household energy is a major component. Energy generation, electricity, industry is another component. Transport is another important component. So I'm going to stop here just by just summarizing that the available evidence clearly links air pollution to a range of health effects in both the short term and the long term. And across South Asia, people are exposed to high levels of air pollution, which has significant health and, as Dr. Pima said, economic impacts as well. And there is a need for sustained long-term action to clean up South Asia air. That sectoral policy action is critical, and I'm looking forward to the panelists' discussion of what can be done. So thank you very much. This is how you can reach us or reach me. And I'm glad to answer any questions you might have. Perhaps I'll stop the share and we can go from there.
Thank you very much, Dan, for underlining also the critical work the State of Global Air report does. And at least I must say that in the Indian context, I have felt, having worked with the Health Effects Institute the last couple of years to make the report go more from the margin to the mainstream, there is definitely a better understanding of the health impacts of air pollution, but it is just that, as you said, there is a lot still that needs to happen in terms of making any change, but I guess those are the kind of things that we will discuss in the solutions panel. I'm also conscious that possibly Dr. Pema Gamsho will have to leave for another meeting at this time, and I only wanted to ask the attendees if there was any question for Dr. Pema at this moment. If not, then I will move on and request Iqbal to please come in, and you can take over and start the panel, but I only wanted to check if there was any question in the chat, and I don't see it. Maybe, Ik, if that's all right with you, could we go ahead and bring you and our experts to talk about the solutions and move into the rest of the session?
Absolutely. Do you want to give the bio for the panelists and we'll go from there?
Sure, I can, and I must say that, you know, it's quite an esteemed panel, and I was acting clever and not wanting to read the long achievements of everybody. I will still avoid doing that. I did introduce everybody in the beginning, but yes, on the panel, certainly, you know, we have Professor Tripathi. As I introduced, Prof is not just the head of civil engineering department at IIT Kanpur, but he also has been undertaking some innovative approaches for indigenously building low-cost sensor-based networks across the country. And that's the work that we've been also aware of and helping Prof in that. Professor Tripathi is also the lead coordinator of the National Knowledge Network, which is formed under the Clean Air Program of the Government of India and sits under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Saida, as I said, is a lawyer with the Supreme Court of Bangladesh. Her main focus has been to promote the notion of environmental justice in the country. Coming from a country which is not new to the impacts of climate change, I'm sure Ivana Saida has had a lot of orientation with, you know, the problems of climate change, and certainly how Bangladesh as a low-income country has been facing a lot of, you know, environmental concerns. And lately, at least as part of the climate movement, I've been observing just the tensions on mitigation efforts, the moving away from coal, and how international financing for coal and the climate discussions shape up in Bangladesh. Those are just difficult conversations, Saida. And I hope that, you know, your your presence to the panel will certainly shed a lot of light in terms of what the perspectives of your country are. And just for everybody, Rizwana has been also a Magsaysay Award winner in 2012. Dr. Maheshwar Rupaketi has been doing a lot of research, which includes air pollution and climate interaction. And he's focused on the Himalayan region as well and focused on capacity building in developing countries. He's also previously worked with the UNEP in Thailand. And we hope that his perspective, especially the deep insights that can come from working in the region, will be quite valuable for the panel. Dr. James Scheuer, like I said before, is from the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at the University of Wisconsin. He's been using research methods to understand the origin of impact of air pollution in the urban atmosphere on human health and ecosystems and impacts on global climate change. I think that kind of guidance and steer for this panel will be quite critical, especially when the conversation on air pollution is not unidirectional or lateral, but kind of intersects a lot with, not just the other weather systems, but with climate in general. And we have Glinda, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Clean Air Asia. Glinda was among the lawyers who helped draft the 1999 Philippines Clean Air Act. So certainly she's not new to the domain. She's also led Asia Clean Fuels and Vehicles program, which has resulted in national policies and roadmaps for cleaner fuels and vehicles in Vietnam and Philippines, and has been quite an important member in the Philippines Congress on talking about measures for exempting electric vehicles from excise taxes, promoting electric vehicles, strengthening vehicle standards, fuel specifications, so forth, and actually implementing the Clean Air Act in the Philippines. We have Ik, who is going to moderate this panel. His research has primarily been into the scales of air quality and greenhouse gas pollutant distribution and behavior. He's researched for quite a number of years at the University of Cambridge, where he concentrated on pioneering the use of miniature sensors in composition measurements. He had work on atmosphere science in ICIMOD and has been quite knowledgeable on environment and climate change working at ICIMOD. I will not get into a very long introduction at this moment. I think this was long enough, but let me please hand over to Ik, who's going to moderate the panel discussion from here on. And thanks very much to everybody for joining once again.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our first two speakers for providing an excellent foundation basis for us to continue this session on. Speaking of which, I'd like to invite Dr. Tripathi to maybe give your presentation or 5 minutes of discussion of your main points you'd like to have raised in this panel. And I'll do the same then for each panelist in turn.
Thank you, Dr. Maid. And it's very timely that Climate Trend and ICIMOD have come together to organize this panel. So a lot of ground already has been laid by Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Prema. I would just like to follow upon that. So there are three issues I would mainly address here. One is that what are the common challenges and opportunities we have here, mainly for the three countries from where people are today assembled here from South Asia, and how we could have some collaborative efforts to tackle with the problem. Second, what's the current thinking in India about developing a regional airshade and how that can be stressed to cross maybe the political boundaries of the countries to deal with transboundary problem. And third, what are the major policy decisions that India has taken in the last few years, as a National Clean Air Program has been talked about, which has started to show some very early sign of getting some PM reduction in National Capital Region of Delhi, and what other signs we are seeing as far as people's exposure is concerned, as Dr. Greenspan has talked about. So let me just give you that to begin with. There are some striking similarity. For example, you look the entire Gangetic Plain of India and Kathmandu both have a valley-like situation. So they are basically, naturally the odds are against them as far as air pollution is concerned. And in fact, I was looking today for Kathmandu, if I was just Googling, and I think the PM 2.5 numbers are exceeding what today it might be in Delhi. Actually, it's far exceeding what there is in Delhi. But in Dhaka, it's still low. So, we are part of a network that's called Spartan. It's a global network that not only gets idea about PM 2.5, it also can use a very wonderful technique. I don't want to go into the details of that. It can invert it to get some idea about sources. And as was pointed out that by and large, that residential cooking is the largest source contributing the human exposure across, at least if I look into Dhaka and Kanpur, and I would like to stretch here that Kanpur is a very representative site in Indo-Gangetic Plain. So, as Dr. Greenspan said, that switching to LPG in India certainly has made a huge improvement in people's exposure. And I'd just like to make a comment here that the LPG numbers actually, the LPG connections, I think is exceeding 14 crore in India today. And fortunately, I have been associated with a study that was looking about people's exposure and human health impact across 6 states in India. It's a bit early to disclose that information, but 2,400 people were surveyed across 6 states. And we are seeing some very clear signals which are emerging related to people health improvement because of the lesser exposure to household cooking. So that's I think that very well goes in line with what he talked about earlier. So one other important similarity what I've seen between Kanpur and Dhaka, because this is part of the same network, same time, same sampling was done. And it is surprising that the Dhaka PM 2.5 is lesser than Kanpur, but the metal concentration, for example, I was looking into the lead, is far more and actually exceeding NOx values for a good time of the year. So that's something, as we know, that lead is a very, very strong carcinogen. And that's something we need to think about. So that's one important aspect of what I'm going to discuss. The second issue currently, as I said, that as a part of National Clean Air Program, where Dr. Greenspan showed one slide, it's a very grounds up approach. Of course, it's planned at the federal level, but it is a very city-centric program as of now, in which they call as mission. So basically, they have identified about 130 non-attainment cities, the cities which do not adhere to the National Air Quality Standard. But now, as Aarti mentioned, that we have put together this National Knowledge Network, that is basically a network of higher technical institutions across the country just to help implement National Clean Air Program. So we have been now entrusted with the responsibility to start thinking in the terms of airshed. So starting with still with the provincial approach that going with the province level management, and then going beyond the province or the what you call the entity which is called as states within the country, and going beyond that and try to formulate airshed. And in that context, I mentioned that it could help that the countries and the people from the countries who are sitting today here, it could be very interesting,
1 minute, Mr. Patil.
interesting starting point where we could start some discussion in that direction. And already we have seen some results that shows that there is to and fro transport of air pollution, at least I've seen between Gangetic Plain and Kathmandu. That's the point number 2. And third, I said that there are already some signs of reduction in PM 2.5 in Delhi NCR, and that is shown by Central Pollution Control Board and as well as people from IIT Delhi, that about 20% reduction we have seen in last 4 years. It's still early, but there are 5 or 6 major policy measures they took in NCR that includes building of large ring roads, switching to cleaner brick clean technology, installation of SEMS across industries, switching to clean fuel industries. I think all of them, and then trying to avoid the burning of biomass by supplying these what is called as large farming machines. All 5 have removed PM 2.5 from this volume of NCR, and that is showing some very, very interesting early signs. There are 2 other major policy decisions that I also would like to mention here. That India just announced a national biomass mission, and that is a multi-agency, multi-ministry effort, and hopefully we are going to see some signs of improving PM 2.5, because that is going to not only cover the agriculture sector, but it will also cover the urban and many other sectors. And there is one more scheme. I don't have time. I'll be happy to discuss that again. So thank you very much. And I will be happy to take some questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you for raising those points. Could I open the floor for 5 minutes then to Ms. Rizwana as well, please?
Yes. Thank you very much. Actually, a lot has been said. I'll just talk a little about some of the problems that are quite unique to Bangladesh, and then make some recommendations about what can be done. So it has just been reported in the major newspapers that a study has found that the major cities of Bangladesh will become unlivable because the temperature will really increase there due to the total unplanned urbanization that is taking place, which is totally going for concretization and actually reducing the urban forestry to an alarming level. Another study, which is a study of the FAO, that has said that the deforestation rate in Bangladesh is double the global deforestation rate. So Bangladesh already has very little amount of forest cover. But then again, the deforestation rate in Bangladesh is 2.6, whereas globally the average of deforestation rate is 1.3. Few months back, I think it was in April, another international source has claimed that some parts of Dhaka have got a strange cover of methane, and they have said that it's actually coming from a particular landfill site in Dhaka. 6-7 years back, the World Bank did a study which said that the major source of air pollution in Bangladesh is the brick manufacturing units that basically burn the bricks that are produced from the topsoil of agricultural lands. So we do have this unique problems of air pollution in addition to the usual ones like the transportation and other stuff. I would like to, I mean, from my experience, I have seen that while other environmental problems are taken seriously because they are visible, air pollution is often not taken very seriously because it's considered as an invisible problem. So if the smoke coming out of the car is not black, nobody is concerned about it. So it's taken as an invisible environmental problem, and accordingly less priority is attached to it. While most of the global studies are saying that Bangladesh or the air of Dhaka is the second worst in terms of pollution, sometimes we are now beating Delhi also. The government of Bangladesh has decided that instead of having a specific law, a parent law on air pollution, they'll actually go for a rule, a bylaw, to be framed under the Environment Conservation Act, which means that they're not proposing a new institutional setup. Rather, they'll actually be putting the whole responsibility on the already overburdened Department of Environment. So this would tell everyone about the importance that this problem is being given by the policymakers and the way they're trying to solve it. So I would recommend that all countries need to have specific law to deal with air pollution. And there has to be a very clear monitoring system. It can't be all centralized. In Bangladesh, you do have some monitoring stations set up here and there, but they're not set up in the most polluted part of the cities. They're set up in areas and they're actually giving you statistics and information on a day when it's raining very heavily in Dhaka. You know what I mean? So having the monitoring station will not only will not solve the problem. You have to set it properly at the right point and have to do the monitoring at the right time. Information is very, very, very. How many minutes? Done?
1.
Okay, information is very important in disseminating information among the people. When we hear that our air was the worst in the world, our school students, college students, those who are going out are never given any alert that you should be wearing mask or you should not be going to school today. So working on information at the government level and disseminating it to the people is important. Addressing the point sources is important, and some soft approaches through the local government agencies like rooftop gardening, like increasing the urban forest cover, like giving efficient burning units to all the households in the local government units can be considered. In terms of alternatives, no, we must say no to coal. It is being an addition to our list of pollutants. We should be switching to renewables because we have all the potentials and the financial resources and the technical know-how. No burn bricks. We have to switch to other construction material. And instead of public transportation, all our roads here in the South Asia, the public traffic system is very car-centric. It's neither public transportation friendly, there is hardly any car-free day, and we probably can think of encouraging people to go by cycles. So these are some of the things that came to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing it down to specific issues for the region as well. Dr. Rivaketti, please, if you could take 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ik. Thank you, organizers, ICIMOD and Climate Change for inviting us. I won't go, I'm repeating what has been already said regarding air pollution in the region, but one thing quite, struck me as well is the clean air. Breathing clean air, it's kind of luxury in many parts of the world. And just, Dan said earlier that no one in South Asia has that luxury. 100% of us are breathing in, dirty air. So many things have been already said, so I'm not going to repeat that, but, I just want to share my observations, working intensively in South Asia and then based in Germany. I get a number of requests from the students or fellows or experts who are interested in working with us or have a joint collaboration. I get a request something like, I specialize in aerosol chemistry. I specialize in aerosol physics. I specialize in ozone chemistry, and then I would like to work on this. And being an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary institute, I often look into their, CV, or when I have a chance to, talk to them. For example, someone says, I have a, specialized in aerosol physics, and I look at, the CV and see if the person has taken any course in meteorology or chemistry, or forget about any course on social science. So the things, are getting so narrowly defined, and we are basically missing this common understanding of the issue. So I'll touch upon only 3 things here, maybe, first 2 things, and then if the question comes over, I'll go on other issues as well. So basically, understanding these underlying processes, what is leading to this situation? What are the governing factors? Whether, we are talking about energy transitions in South Asia, how it is linked to air pollution, and then, health and, other impacts. What about the climate and agriculture policies, how they're linked to this? This kind of underlying factors are largely missing. So what happens is we have a very narrowly defined, views on air pollution. So I often call this, we need to have a dragonfly's eyes view. Dragonfly has, multiple lenses in his eyes. So we need to have this, common understanding of the processes first, and then we have a common understanding of the sustainability challenge. And then, when you work together to define the solutions, they are more likely to be more effective, and that would lead to the transformation. So this, the common understanding, coming together, talking to each other, working together in a more transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, fashion, is still largely missing in South Asia. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to work in South Asia, but in the Himalayan region, that we have published a number of papers looking at the effects or the nature of the aerosol coming from polluted regions to the Himalaya, and we see that they increasingly change their behavior. They are more effective in absorbing sunlight, etc. So that's one point. And then the second one is building this scientific base, the evidence base. So it's not just for aerosol science or ozone chemistry, or health effect. Sitting together and then building this common scientific base that everyone understands, and then we build and keep building on that, based on that, we build the solutions. I think that is partly and largely missing in different part of South Asia. Some countries have done better, the others are still lagging, but that is the part we are still missing. So I'll stop there.
Oh, very much appreciated. Thank you for the timekeeping. It's very hard to cut people off when they're talking about such interesting things. Professor Shao, could I pass over to yourself at the moment?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak here. It's great to be on the panel with these esteemed colleagues. I would note that some of them I've had interactions with for about 20 or 30 years. I can't believe it's been that long. But I just really want to just give you, I think I have 5 kind of high bullet points that I just want to really emphasize. And I just want to say that from my perspective, it's integrated over my sort of career experience. I started out my career as a chemical engineer building oil refineries in Southeast Asia and around the world. And then I started working as a graduate student on the LA air pollution problem in the early 90s, and been involved in source apportionment studies. And now I actually serve as the director of our state public health laboratory, where my job is to provide data to the state agencies to actually help make policy. So I want to share my thoughts in those 3 perspectives. The first thing I think has already been said, but I want to say it again. There's no silver bullet. We really need a comprehensive and adaptable and dynamic plan. We learn more as we go forward and sources change. We need to make sure that we have intermittent goals moving forward, as well as address all sectors. There's not one answer, one sector. We really need to make progress everywhere across sectors and over time. The second thing I really want to emphasize is that I think it's really important that we not only focus on pushing towards clean air, but we focus on reducing the barriers to clean air. And what I mean by that is I think we need to make sure, and I think Dr. Tripathi said this already, we're synchronizing across all levels of government. I think we need to establish strong partnerships and collaboration between government, industry, academia, as well as community groups. I think they have to work together. Dan Greenbaum wrote a very important, led a group panel that wrote a National Academy of Science report that's over 20 years old that emphasizes that. And I encourage people to look at that if they get a chance. I think we need to think about education outreach. We need to make sure that the public and the community understands the problem, so we're solving the right problem and not the wrong problem. And finally, I think we need to understand about access to technology and know-how. I think it's really important for us to recognize there's technological solutions, and we really need to bring knowledge from industry, from around the world, from academia. But I think we need to understand that some of the solutions are behavioral, and we really need to have the community engagement with academia to think about these social solutions that complement the technological solutions. I think it's also important that we address the issues of the economic assessment and make sure that this is done in a robust and transparent way. We hear so often that we can't make these controls because it's too expensive. I've heard so many times in my travels around the world that we cannot have low clean fuels and lower sulfur fuels. But I can tell you 30 years ago, I helped build clean oil refineries in Nigeria and the Philippines. So if that could be done 30 years ago, it can be done almost anywhere in the world right now. I was a startup engineer on those facilities. I think we also need to understand that a lot of the things that we do have huge co-benefits. So we need to think about giving incentives to work on things that will promote clean air, but also have economic growth. I think there's a lot of assessment about how the US economy was able to grow during a time where we did tremendous impacts on clean air. There's many entrepreneurial opportunities that we need to enhance going forward. I think the fourth thing real quick is I think we need to make sure about accountability. I know HEI has done some important work maybe almost 15, 20 years ago about that now. And the idea that we close the loop, we can't just make policies and just let that go into the horizon. We need to make sure we're assessing that, we're monitoring. When we talk about source apportionment, it's not only to understand the problem, but it's understand how our policies are effective or not. We need to make sure that we are continually doing this assessment of accountability to make sure that the policies really are effective. And then finally, the last thing I really want to emphasize is I think we really also need to properly align our understanding and our response to climate change and air quality. There are many places where they overlap, but there's also many places where one could make the other one worse. We need to understand about fuels, about energy. We hear a lot about banning certain types of technologies and fuels, but remember, there are technologies to remove emissions. We have control technologies and we have switching where we can move to clean fuels or clean technologies. And we need to make sure those are aligned so that we're not focusing on one that makes us miss the point in the other. So for example, if we only focus on long-term climate benefits, we will delay the improvement of air quality. And we need to make sure that those are aligned properly together. So thank you. I think I'm about 5 minutes, so I think I'll stop there and
hang on. Thank you. I was just about to put my finger up there. There we go. Could I invite Ms. Batan to round off this initial panel introduction?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent.
Yes, and I'm going to have a few slides, which I'll go through very quickly. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, yes. So I'll start with some with some of the key messages that I'd like to make in this presentation. And the first is that in-country air pollution sources are the priority for country control because these are the sources that are within their influence in terms of policy. And for the sources that are outside a country's boundaries, it has very little or little or no control over this. And this is where regional cooperation among countries would be needed. And second is that political will and science make very strong foundations for regional cooperation. And in fact, not so long ago, there is the South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, or SACEP, Male Declaration on Control and Prevention of Air Pollution and its transboundary effects for South Asia, and the scientific work of intergovernmental bodies and think tanks such as ICIMOD provide the foundation for this regional cooperation. And lastly, we need to set countries and cities up for success with tools and training. And this means helping, providing technical assistance, capacity building, good practice sharing platforms, because these are key to translating these intergovernmental declarations into real solutions implemented on the ground. And I'll speak of an example of a result of intergovernmental meetings by UNEP and Clean Air Asia in the region. So first and foremost, prioritizing control of in-country sources requires ensuring policies, the enabling policies are in place for the control of air pollution. And this is where emission standards for specific sources are needed. Thus, here an example would be tightening emission standards for industries such as coal-fired power plants. Of course, ensuring that the monitoring of compliance to ambient air quality standards are in place, and institutionalizing solutions, not only at the national level, but also at city level. And talking about the role of subnational government states and local government units, there is a need to mainstream air quality in urban development in Asia. Cities have been called the engines of economic growth, but that they are also at the front lines of air pollution. And therefore, we need to be helping them out to control air pollution. So some of the work that we're doing across Asia includes helping cities to develop their clean air action plans and implementing them. These are all science-based, meaning there's evidence of emission sources and air pollution, which are the basis for coming up with the mitigation actions. So I've spoken earlier about the Male Declaration, which actually was started quite early in the, late 90s. And this had, the participating countries included these, and they were really meant to address the increasing threat of transboundary pollution. And so the effort continued up to 2014, thereabouts, and there was a waning of activities. But I understand from our country networks in the region that there is renewed interest to continue the cooperation. And these are some of the outcomes based on an evaluation done of the project. So the scientific research that underpinned some of the work of SACEP and the Male Declaration, we could say that the atmospheric brown cloud study was one of these efforts to provide the scientific basis for policies. And speaking about the tools that are available, that are needed by cities, this is the guidance framework for better air quality in Asian cities. And these align along 6 guidance areas, and resources are available in learning portals such as this, which is available here. And I end there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. You beat me to the punch on the final time there. So thank you all for continuing to frame the discussion in various different ways and from various different angles, all very different in terms of approach, but all of them coming down to the same sort of concerns at the end of it. I'd like to open up to the panel just for discussion, very briefly, a few issues. The first one, I suppose, would be the gender stroke neonate issue in terms of disproportionate effects of air quality on members of or proportions of the general population. Does anyone want to mention anything about that briefly? And I'm including Dr. Greenbaum and Dr. Payman as well, if you feel free to join in. I'm thinking, Dr. Maheshwar, you might have something to say about that.
Just a quick note. I think it's well understood that there's a disproportionate, impact of air quality on different spectrum of the population. So that's why we call this like a two world we inhabited. So there is a kind of divided world because of impact of air pollution. So that much I can say.
Linking on to that in terms of the health elements, morbidity versus mortality. Is there a case for discussing both with governments, or are the shock tactics of this many people have died prematurely, as is currently being mainly espoused? Should we also be talking about quality of life? Should we also talking about happiness indexes or equivalents in terms of where we live and how we live? Dr. Greenbaum, and I suppose, Linda, would you like to comment on that as well? And Saida, please.
Thank you, Ik. Maybe I can start the discussion. At the subnational levels, we're seeing that there is greater emphasis on competitiveness and the role that air pollution control and air quality plays in this. And there have been studies that show maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where the human capital that is needed to really make cities engines of growth is affected. The choices that employees make in where they want to work and live is pretty much somehow determined by the air pollution levels. They want to avoid those places where air pollution is high. And there is even a premium. Well, there is it would cost more for a company to hire people to, incentivize people to live in places where there's high levels of pollution. And so this speaks a lot to this issue, this desire for city competitiveness, and therefore is a real yes, it is something that resonates with subnational level decision makers.
If I could pass it across to Dr. Saida then, bearing in mind that large swaths of Bangladesh are, shall we say, populated at this stage, and it's very difficult for people to move around outside of those population zones, do you think that a country similar to Bangladesh and the same economic level of development could start thinking about these kinds of policies, or is that a little bit further down the line, looking at welfare as opposed to straight up morbidity, mortality measurements?
I didn't
Right,
hear
that was
you
unclear.
properly. You were breaking. You're breaking.
Sorry. So, following on from Glinda's points, in terms of people moving or living
Still
in
breaking.
areas.
Still breaking.
Oh, apologies. Is anyone else having my voice breaking? Just to. Okay, I'll simplify the question, Dr. Saida. In Bangladesh, are you experiencing the same issues? Are people looking at air quality as a wellness issue as well as a health issue? My apologies. I'm going to move across to Dr. Greenbaum to maybe comment. In your wider assessment system, are you taking into account these sort of more intangibles in terms of drivers for economic development, population movement, urbanization, these kinds of things?
That's a very good question. Although our global burden of disease estimate doesn't look at that directly, we have been participating in several key studies of some of the same questions that Glinda Bathan mentioned. For example, estimates done with the World Bank and others of the human capital, the implications of this. And also looking at the sheer economic impact of lost days of work, lost school days, a number of other things that are very significantly and can directly contribute to economic well-being. So it's not yet being reported directly as part of the global burden of disease, but we are regularly integrating these other analyses into our conversations about what the implications are for air pollution.
Thank you very much. Dr. Shah and also Professor Tripathi, would you like to comment? Both of you mentioned briefly the idea that solutions have been identified, concepts for making it better. And Saida mentioned the same thing with brick kilns, as did Dr. Pema. We have identified ways we can make a difference. To what extent, in your opinions, is the trope that environmental action for either improving or maintaining the quality of the environment is the antithesis of economic growth?
Sachi, you want to go first, or you want me to?
Oh, you can go first, Jimmy, and then
I'll shifting.
That's fine. That's fine. So I think we really need to work hard to make sure that we get the message out that investment in clean technologies can be economically, can be very economically positive. I think that we need to do a better job of giving case studies and giving information. I think it's viewed as like just we're going to spend money, but I think if we come up with innovative solutions, I guess in the simple case of the brick kilns, if we can make better bricks, there's an economically benefit to that. One of the things about we need to be thinking about if vehicles can be produced locally that are electric or lower emissions or a lower technology, these are the things we need to look for. It's about pathways, and I think that I think there are case studies. I think for my examples that in my personal career about clean fuels, I know that these refineries are built because they have value-added products, and so I think that the idea that clean air is is just too costly to do as something we need. Independent of the health benefits, which greatly are, the benefits would certainly outweigh the costs. I think even in other economic measures of co-benefits towards climate change, things of congestion, of industry growth, I think we need to focus on what those positives are and optimize where we invest in clean technologies, in my opinion.
Thank you. Professor Tripathi, do you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that there has been a shift, in fact, in the thinking of policymakers in the country, as several examples I gave, like moving to solar or moving to, low sulfur fuel. I remember that I was part of India-California Air Pollution Mitigation Program in 2013, and it seemed to be a tall order that we could have a quick setup of refineries and we can go for production of low sulfur fuel. And there was a leapfrogging from Bharat 4, as you call, right, high sulfur to low sulfur. So these are just some examples where there is that thinking, but I would still say that at the very high level, there is this thinking that yes, this is very much possible, and you can have the co-benefits, the benefits in the climate mitigation. But I think I also believe that this needs to percolate to the private sector as well in the country, and at the very regional and local level, right? And that, because when you now come to the level of the street, or where the street vendors are small foundries or small, so there are lots of informal, what you call, sector and economic activities in the country, in India at least I'm talking about. There we need to provide incentives where they also start moving to the cleaner sources of energy. So everything cannot be driven from the central government or from the state government, or everything cannot be government driven. So I still see that there is a need for the private sector to come forward and start thinking in that direction in a major way.
Thank you. As you brought in the private sector, you're essentially opening the door to economic arguments. And obviously economic tools can go both ways. You can have incentivization, we can also have, shall we call it, well, we'll call it punishment inappropriately, I think, but taxes can be thought of that way. In your view, I'll put this over to Maheshwar and Saida, and then after that, Glinda, if you would you like to comment on the use of environmental taxes as well as incentivized action in your region?
I can't speak to any specific country. I'm mostly, working on a regional scale. But, like I said earlier, most of the time, air pollution is seen as an environmental problem, environmental challenge. And you hardly see, even in the scientific papers, that it is not just environmental, it's an economic, it's a societal issue, and it needs more, integrated problem, solution. So it is actually a crisis at the systemic scale. So that needs a solution at the systemic scale as well. So whether it's a taxation issue, or whether, like you said, punishing or penalizing the dirty technologies, or incentivizing the cleaner technologies involving private sector, I think we need to look into that as a component of our whole socio-economic development systems, so that we understand the role of each sector in the development of the country.
Saida, would you care to comment from a Bangladesh point of view in particular?
Yes, but but most of the time you are the only one who is breaking for me. Anyway, your words.
Sorry.
I come from Bangladesh, and I must tell you that while I see the government taking definite moves in terms of going for better technology for producing construction material and say no to the conventional burnt brick, I don't see much being done in the energy sector. And the government is adding on more coal projects to the list. We just had one that the government decided to go for 29, and they have now come down to 18. And I see that although we are surplus in energy production, and there are coal plants that are, just sitting idle, and we are paying them for running their capacity. We are not seeing enough enthusiasm in the government to go for renewable. And the renewable target that's being fixed for Bangladesh is just 10%. And we say that we'll have 10% renewable by 2020, and we could meet only 3%. So the government is clearly not saying no to fossil, and there is big economy involved there, whereas renewable, in terms of global corruption index also, do not create that much of opportunity for corruption and other incentives that people who support the fossil fuel industry really crave for. So I think that there has to be a total transformation in the development vision. Even in the South Asian constitution, you have environment as a state duty, except Nepal. No other country recognizes environment as a fundamental right. Whereas if you want to say no to coal, they'll call you as an anti-development person. The fact that your right to life includes your right to inhale clean air is something that is not legally recognized, that is not politically respected. So yes, some bits and parts are being done here and there, but the total development scenario is very much in favor of the fossil fuel. And I would say that the development pattern is much more exploitative, and all these calls for less CO emission is not creating a hype in countries like ours. We think we still have the quota and can keep on emitting. But what impact that's bringing on our local population, that's being totally ignored.
Thank you. So I'm going to go for the Clean Air Asia view on this, stepping back out similar to Maheshwar's.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, the region needs to explore both the command and control measures, but also these instruments, market-based instruments that incentivize a shift towards cleaner energy, less emitting, less polluting energy versus the polluting energy. And we've seen how this has been, we've actually seen case studies of how preferential taxation, for example, for cleaner vehicles have encouraged technologies to be preferred by the public. So take the example of Sri Lanka, where because of preferential taxation for cleaner types of vehicles, they have a lot of hybrids running on the roads. Compared to, there is really a drop in the preference for internal combustion engine, diesel run vehicles, and a preference towards cleaner vehicles like hybrids. And we see that there is a trend, well, at least in the Philippines, a few years ago in the comprehensive tax reform, there was a clear message that electric vehicles are going to be incentivized with 0% taxation compared to those running those fossil fuel run vehicles. And so, well, that has yet to be seen whether the Philippine example results in the desired emission reduction. But the Philippine example is a bit of a hybrid, because there was a preferential tax on electric vehicles and a higher tax on the gasoline run and the diesel run vehicles. But the money that was raised from the polluting vehicles is meant to be used to clean up the very polluting jeepneys. I don't know if you've been, I think for you who know the jeepneys, these are diesel run second-hand engines that are used for public transportation. And so it was a bit of a hybrid where you tax the polluting source and use the money raised there to actually clean up some of the other polluting sources. And so, there are these innovative ways of using market-based instruments that we're seeing in the region now.
I think that's very exciting. Thank you for bringing it up, because a number of countries shall we call them more your developing economies are looking at these hybrid modes and the push-pull economic drivers to try and make change in a way that some of the larger, more developed economies are maybe not. So I think there's lessons that we could be in the region teaching outside of our region, say, look, lots of this activity has value and you should be looking at us, not just the other way around. Could I invite Dr. Pema to give a view on the sort of a regional ICIMOD view as well?
Thank you very much, Ik, and thank you all the panelists, and of course, Dr. David. I've been listening very closely because this is a subject very close to my heart, as I mentioned earlier. Something has to, these are things that we have to begin at the individual level. So if we have, if you consider this at the individual level, it will definitely go up to the national and regional and international levels. But there's a pointed question for me from Fahim Khokar. Fahim, I would like to just respond to you first and then touch on some of the things if I have a little time. Okay, Fahim, yes, you're right. ICIMOD has been working mostly in Nepal and Bhutan and then on brick cleans with Pakistan. But that doesn't mean that the information that we are generating, the technologies that we are generating here, has not been shared with our other member countries. And in terms of actual intervention, we very much and the needs determined by our member countries and of course our partners working with us. So if there is no demand, it's also a bit difficult for us to engage in a way that could be sustained. The activities could be sustained. But now we are, embarking on developing a new strategy in which we feel that this is going to be a major program, the air pollution control and improvement of air quality. In addition to what Dr. David has already mentioned, the economic costs, indirect costs, for example, most of us are today wearing glasses, including myself. It's mostly to do with the quality of air in our houses, and especially as you mentioned, the clean cooking air is still, inaccessible to many of our rural communities, and the amount of money that may be going into eye surgery, people going blind at a very early age, I think a lot to do with the quality of air. So I think that is something we don't consider apart from the other, health effects and so on. We need to look at that. Now, ICIMOD is very much looking at the regional dimensions, the town's boundary dimensions of air pollution. The air pollution is rising from elsewhere, brings about black carbon and dust particles that is deposited on the ice, the snow, and contributes to the fast melting of glaciers. And that in turn, triggers what is known as blow or glacial lake outburst floods, which brings about disasters in the downstream areas. So it's regionally collected, both the causes and consequences, and we really need to work together, and that is the key message that I am bringing in. The nexus between energy, between environment, climate change, and economy, I think we need to take a holistic approach that requires regional cooperation. Now, one thing that I also want to mention is ICIMOD has always been working on in providing clean cooking energy for the remote mountain communities. We have been promoting bio-briquette, for example, as an alternative to fuel wood and dumps with the herders. We have also introduced solar lamps and solar cooking panels and so on, and of course biogas for the meat hills and so on. So quite a lot of activities are being done in the other countries also, but we really need to scale this up to reach the regional level. Thank you very much, Ik. Sorry for taking a little more time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pema. I mean, we're winding up the session now. Before we go on to the wider Q&A from the floor, we've not addressed a fraction of all the questions coming in through the chat, and it's fantastic to see those questions. And could I strongly encourage people to continue these conversations after these sessions as well? I mean, in the email world, we can all just have them sent around, and let's keep this as a collaborative, ongoing activity. Well, I'd like to finish this up by saying that it's very interesting to hear all the views have reflected the need for looking at the wider picture, not just a central narrow issue one at a time. Some people have mentioned it in terms of perverse incentives. Some people have mentioned it in terms of co-benefits. Some people have mentioned it in terms of it needs to be done so that it can better affect other related areas which might not be in the public or policy eye related. And you've also, everyone has mentioned scales at some level, no pun intended. They've all been talking about personal action, they're talking regional action, governmental action, these kinds of things. One of the things that has also clearly come out from this conversation is the need for regional collaboration, transboundary, and an element of the, none of our speakers have put barriers to that. And I feel that people involved in this research area have a responsibility to be pushing this agenda of transnational approaches in an era when perhaps individual countries are focusing on individual countries' needs. I think it's fantastic to have this body of people who are willing to talk. And from talking, I think we can then move to action. When we have like-minded and informed discussion across the board, I think that's a very powerful thing. Not just like-minded, but also contrary views. As long as people are talking, we can start looking at making impact. Dr. Greenbaum, you looked like you were about to imminently say something there. All right. Well, I'd like to thank the panel once again for giving us their time and their insight into this. And could I strongly recommend the members on the floor, the members in the general chat, please take advantage of this opportunity to ask specialists in the field questions, follow up, make linkages, discuss things. With that, thank you. Now, I am going to open it up to the wider floor. We have 10 minutes, essentially, or 10, 15 minutes for some selected questions from the chat. Now, I've picked out a few. I may be biased, so I'm relying on Arti to pull me up short if I'm asking questions which she feels are minor and missing out the big ones because they're too difficult and I don't address them. So Arti, you're my conscience here. So something that's come up in the chat by quite a few members is the issue of monitoring, observations, evidence, and who's measuring what and where. I think that for this part of the session, I'd like to invite anyone to make a comment on that if they'd like, and I'll start off with saying that we currently understand a noted measure. We currently understand air quality based on the measurements we make. Those measurements are then modeled, interpolated, and analyzed. But fundamentally, we need to have a better understanding of emissions, of sources of activity, as well as observations of those as an independent check, as well as the overall understanding of analytics and modeling and so on and so forth, as a positive feedback loop. If any one of those links is missing, the rest suffer. The error margins remain large, and we may be maybe not as efficiently targeting solutions as we could be in what is, let's be honest, a resource limited region. Maheshwar, please.
Yeah, that's the point I actually wanted to bring up early on when I spoke earlier. If you look at the monitoring of air pollution or any other atmospheric pollutants in South Asia, to some extent Delhi is good, but except Delhi, everywhere else is awfully inadequate. Especially looking at the regional scale pollution. There are monitoring centers in the cities, but looking at the regional pollution, there's virtually none. There are a couple of new stations coming up, whether ICIMOD-led initiative in Bhutan or there is a station in Nainital in India. Otherwise, the whole Himalayan Himalayan region, the regional monitoring of air pollution is almost nil. And there are some some initiatives in Tibetan plateau, but in the southern flank of the Himalayas, it's awfully missing. That is where we there was a question for me as well. Maybe I can just add to that. So we as academicians or researchers, what we can do and what we have demonstrated actually together with the ICIMOD that when we work with the scientific community from within and outside South Asia, we are actually able to really leapfrog in understanding of air pollution issues in South Asia. We have done that. We have demonstrated through a campaign we led together with ICIMOD, and that led to several publications that would have never been possible. So I to address this gap, I still think that the easiest possible thing is enhance the scientific collaboration among the scientists within the region and beyond the region. So that is easier one. We have worked closely with researchers from 9 different countries in a single project, and then got to this situation. So this is doable. We have done that. We have brought India, China, Nepal, and other countries together to work on this. So I think that is probably the most easiest one, and then vitally needed to advance our scientific understanding. So in many countries, there was a question for me about linking science to policy as well. So in many countries, we didn't have that basic scientific information, where the pollution is coming from, what level of pollution is there, and where it is coming from, and what can we do about it. So if we don't provide that kind of information, solid scientific base for decision makers to feed into the decision making, so that is where we as a scientist can help.
I mean, that's something very, very close to my heart, this evidence base, a generation of foundational evidence which allows further work to be done. And more importantly, there's something which is especially close to my heart, is appropriate measurement. Now, Glinda, you mentioned something, and obviously, Maheshwar, this is an area of interest for yourself directly. The key element of understanding what's going on is understanding what you need to understand. And once you've got that in mind, we need to be getting that appropriate data where we need to get it, not trying to just use the best instrument from the best companies, and you end up having one station in the middle of a city, in the middle of the country. And let's be honest here, there's a large element of profile and public image involved. You can open a nice big shiny station and everyone involved gets the old photographs and handshakes. The issue of appropriate measurements, the right measurement in the right place to the right level, I think is something as a region we all need to consider, because again, resource limited, but also it's an opportunity for us to learn from the mistakes of others. We can leapfrog the approaches taken by many other countries where they focused on 1 or 2 major stations and then assuming that is representative of the wider picture. Whereas my measurements, I've shown variation on every scale I've measured at, be that hundreds of kilometers, tens of kilometers, or tens of centimeters. So depending on what you're trying to understand, from personal exposure to transnational pollution transport, there's variation at every scale. So appropriate data is something I'm very much an advocate for. And tying into Fahim's comment, as you know, Fahim, I'm keen to do this, and part of my role at ICIMOD is to have this regional approach for all of us working together beyond our, should we call them our heartlands, where we've established research collaborations and communities. Dr. Shah, please, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add a couple comments about monitoring in general. I just want to say at one is that I think we need to recognize that there's different types of monitoring, right? So some monitoring, which I would call compliance monitoring, or saying, what is the pollutant concentration? And I don't mean to underestimate the importance of that, but we need to do that. That's clear. And I'll come back to that in a minute, and that's what you're talking about. But I think it's also important to recognize that just monitoring pollution doesn't provide pathways and solutions. There's other monitoring on the sense of source apportionment, where we need to be either looking at, if we're in some places of the world, if we're talking about ozone, that's not what we're talking about here, we may want to measure VOCs. But in the case of particulate matter, we need to do something about the speciation or chemical composition, so we understand that. And so I think that we need to understand that there's different aspects of monitoring. There's also a third part of monitoring that's incredibly important, and that's emissions monitoring. So that is part of the monitoring package, and all of those have to get together. And I think that's what we need to develop a comprehensive source receptor relationships to develop strategies. I would also say that we are at a point where the technological advances, both in monitoring technology, but also source apportionment, there's tremendous breakthroughs. What we can do by integrated systems about satellites with low-cost monitors with regulatory monitors together And again, that's about collaborations that we talked about before. That's critically important. But I also think that there's really emerging tools of source apportionment where we can use different types of data. So I think the idea is that, I guess I want to emphasize both what Masro said about partnerships. We need to get the scientific community integrated with the community and government and the international community, but we also need to bring in these new tools that are better analyzing that data. But again, just emphasizing the point that our end game is not just to say, this is the pollutant concentration, it's high. And we need to understand where it's coming from and what are the solutions to do something about that.
I'm very glad you brought up the point there that what measurement you make might not be important to measure ozone if you want to understand ozone necessarily, that methane or non-methane hydrocarbons or VOCs, those are all vital. I mean, an interesting point for some sub-Saharan countries recently, the biggest error reduction that we've managed to achieve in models wasn't with pollutant concentrations, it was simply with surface winds. So having an understanding of what the surface wind is doing, giving us an indication of our surface roughnesses, for example, was far more valuable and far, far more achievable and cheap, and also with value to teaching and outreach than investing in a 500,000 station to be put in the capital city. So I am agnostic in terms of approaches, and I am the doors of ICIMOD are open to all of these collaborative approaches to understanding the problem in particular without, shall we say, going down rabbit holes of saying we need to have PM measurements at 0.x, whatever it happens to be, micrograms per meter cubed in a certain place. We need to understand the whole problem. And as Dr. Pema said, it's a nexus. We have to be understanding the drivers and the impacts, as well as having this evidence of both the impact being made, changes as they're happening, but also, you mentioned compliance. It's rather unfashionable, but at some point, reality has to bite, and we have to be able to say we have made a difference, or that governments need to make a difference, or whatever the agency happens to be. So there's all sorts of reasons to do something, but fundamentally we all need to be accepting of each other's reasons and understanding that they all come together to provide that greater impact, not just for our region, but also globally. I mean, we are interlinked. We cannot decouple the Himalaya region from the globe. The third pole is critical. Dr. Greenbaum, please.
So,
this time I got it right.
No, that's right. A couple of further thoughts on this. A very important question, and I think James Shower has made a very good point about the different types of monitoring and the different types of measurements that are necessary. One of the things that I think also reverberates back to the earlier conversations, I've certainly seen in the 20 plus years that I've been working in India and other places in South Asia, an increasing sophistication of local scientists who understand the tools for source apportionment and the challenges of source apportionment. We should recognize that there's no place in the world that has totally figured out how to do source apportionment, or that where the academic community agrees on the best way to do source apportionment. But there are improvements and local expertise now that didn't exist 20 years ago, and new people being trained in doing this. And I think that reverberates back to the question of how do you get local officials to understand what the issues are, where they're coming. And the more that you have local experts doing that analysis, presenting that information, that goes much further than the kind of global analyses that we do in terms of incentivizing. The second thing, and Jamie brought this up earlier, we have actually, and we've continued to fund over the last 15 years, we've funded 20 different studies around the world, trying to actually figure out, once an action was taken, did it improve air pollution? Did it improve public health? Most recently, we published a study in California, where they had taken a series of actions to reduce emissions from goods movement. And we actually could track that back to fewer hospitalizations for poor people in California. And that's a very powerful thing. It's something you have to do. We are funding studies like that actually in China currently, and we are always looking for other opportunities, because I think it's really critical to be able to measure not just what's the problem now, but get in that reinforcing cycle of we take the action, we see an improvement. I know there are some people who've been trying to do that in the household arena within India, and trying to set up similar studies with the LPG initiative. And I think the more we can do that, the better off we'll be.
Absolutely agree. It's an interesting point you touched upon there, was this advantage that we have in the region, where we have a high and increasing competency in the sciences and appropriate areas of investigation. And it's interesting that we live in a world, as Maheshwar, you alluded to now, and also James, where the barrier to entry for making measurements and to analyze those measurements, or to analyze things, is decreasing significantly. It is now far, far easier for someone in the foothills of insert mountain name here to get involved at a very high level than it would have been 5 years ago even. So this reduction of that barrier to entry because of computational advances, technological advances, is something that as a region is a huge plus. It's a step change for us. And I think the army of, if you excuse me, nerds, or people who are interested in technology and computing, all these kinds of things, I say nerds, we could also call them rulers of the universe. This is an untapped resource in our region for our youth, for the next generation. Advocates, practitioners, whatever it happens to be, they are energized, they're motivated, and they have more and more tools. And I think it's a key part of some of the work ICIMOD and others are doing, is this education and outreach and increasing people's general understanding of issues so that they can, as you say, Dr. Greenbaum, local advocacy, local capacity is the critical defining element to make change in a local area. Glinda, you looked imminent there. You look like you're about to say something, or I misread that.
Yes, I agree. And I think what's key is to partner and train cities to take advantage of the technology, the air quality monitoring, advancements in the air quality monitoring, and the accessibility of some of these sensors, for them to have greater spatial coverage of their city, and to not just to stop with monitoring, but also analyzing the data, interpreting the data, and then with hyper-local monitoring and data available, actually take action to reduce exposure of vulnerable populations. So that's become possible now, where you can actually have just very few reference grade instruments, but then augment that with a lot of these micro air sensors, and actually gives the city the opportunity to actually start with gathering the data and then actually doing something to address specific pollution sources where there are spikes or hotspots. So that's actually quite exciting. And seeing the studies of massive deployment in the US and in other places, and what kind of information and decisions can be taken very quickly at city level is just exciting.
Thank you, Glinda. I mean, I would voice one note of caution. Not all technology is good technology, and there's sensors and there's sensors, and so we must understand, not just trust the number on the front of the box, as it were. But that's a personal point of contention I like to reiterate regarding small sensors and low-cost sensors, that we have to understand how they operate and how well they operate, and not, because they have value in different ways. Now, I've left the last point. Oh, thank you. I've left the last point till last, specifically because I believe it might be a bit of a hand grenade thrown into the room. It's to do with policy, political will, action, and the disconnect between, shall we call it, academia, public policy levels, and scales of action. So I'm going to open this up to the floor, because I don't want to touch it with a barge pole at this point. In your view, for this region, should we be pushing further for political integration in terms of these problems? And if so, Any suggestions how? I'll start with Dr. Shah, and then I'll hone in via various regional partners to Dr. Saida at the Bangladesh level as well.
I would just start by saying I think we do need to continue to push on more political will and more integration of efforts. And I think one of the things I encourage is to look around what's happening in other parts of the world where there's been successes. But I really want to emphasize also what I said before, and I will keep saying this as we go forward, is that we need to not only focus on pushing harder, but I really think that if we want success, we have to lower barriers. And I think that's a really important point. Pushing harder goes back to the issue about what are the metrics we're trying to highlight? What are we trying to communicate? I think that the barriers to bringing groups together, the barriers to understand what is available from a technology and a social intervention point of view, the barriers to understanding what's been done before and the true economic analysis, to me, are really where we need to put effort. So I would argue that if we can knock the barriers down halfway or 3/4 way down, we'll get a lot more benefit than trying to push harder, if that makes any sense. Not that we should stop pushing, but there's only so much energy we can put on pushing, and we need to focus on lowering barriers. And I think I'm involved in a number of projects that are where we're taking the experts who have, people that did this in the US 30 years ago, or people other parts of the world, to share their experience of how they bridge these gaps. I referenced before the National Academy report that Dan Greenbaum chaired. I think that is a wonderful document that everybody should read. And Dan could comment on that, but I think that it's old, but it has tremendously important lessons about how to bridge those gaps. So that's my perspective.
Well, that's an opportunity, Dr. Greenbaum, for you to jump in.
It is. Yes, it is. And thanks for that, Jamie. And that was done a while ago. And I'm always very hesitant to sort of too quickly say, well, what we did in the US will work anywhere in the world, because of course that's not always the case. But there is experience, and there are things that worked and things that didn't work, that one would want to bring forward and look at. I would add, and it's something to pay attention to, that I've recently become aware, there is actually a further retrospective going on as we speak, as the Clean Air Act in the United States hits 50 years, and a report being prepared right now by advisors to the air quality program in EPA to try and again take a look at these questions and what can learn as that, and I can provide that as it comes together, because that may be a valuable further tool, with all the caveats that say just because something worked in the United States doesn't necessarily means it worked someplace else. Having said that, my experience now working in countries, with the European Union and China and India and other places, is that there are more similarities than there are differences. Some of the issues of regional sources, the issues of how well you understand what the sources are, the technical capabilities can be applied in different places. And I think there are opportunities for cross-learning from that.
Thank you very much. Maheshwar, you look like you're ready to say something.
Not really. I think most of the things have been said, and yeah, I still emphasize for the regional cooperation on at least in the scientific community, so that the science community can keep building the scientific base, utilizing all this recent development in the measurement technologies, etc. So I think that's the thing we need to keep working on.
Thank you very much for reiterating that point. Dr. Penna, would you like to comment?
Just briefly, yes. I think this is, incremental. Change has to be incremental, step by step, like in any other, issues that we are tackling at a regional level. I just want to inform all the panelists and participants here that ICIMOD is also, working towards forming alliances, associations, networks of professionals in different fields. Now, we would be seriously working on forming this network among air pollution scientists or air scientists or air quality scientists so that we could bring the science diplomacy to the front. I think we are also working towards having regular science various issues. So this could be one of the topics that we could invite all the top experts, authorities on air pollution together and then try to chalk out a way forward. Now we are following this, the political commitment that is provided by our regional member countries in the form of a ministerial declaration last year to commit themselves to pursuing the HKH call to action, which among other things commits to working together towards reducing carbon emissions and limiting temperature increases to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. So I think there is a pathway forward, and we should really work together on this. So I wouldn't say that we really need to go upfront and get political engagements upfront, but we have to work towards it. Thank you, Iqbal.
Thank you. Collaboration is the key, I feel. Now, Saida, I'm hoping I'm not breaking up too much, but we'd appreciate your views as well on that.
See, when we talk about regional cooperation on air pollution issues, I think I'll be more confident than in other environmental issues, because this one appears to be more benign than the other ones. We tried to actually have some sort of unity over water issues. We didn't have much luck. And regional integration in South Asia is not the same as you see in Europe or in North America or in Southeast Asia. But then, of course, there are technologies, the alternatives we talk about, what can be alternative to burnt brick. These are some of the issues we can learn from our South Asian countries. I think it's important that we focus on push. I won't say that enough push has been given. Enough science has actually been produced before our policymakers, but then we suddenly heard that coal has become green coal. So coal projects can become green coals, and they talk about technology from critical to ultra super critical technology that makes thermal power plants green. So I think it's important that we emphasize on technology and standardization and do proper assessment of those. Otherwise, we actually get swayed by terminologies like green coal, environmentally benign coal projects, jargons of this sort. And the other issue on which I would emphasize is process. We do have development projects that are being approved by our governments. And despite serious objections, vehement protests from the people, they get the approval. Few weeks back, our prime minister said in one meeting that if environmental clearance does not come and environmental impact assessment is not approved within the stipulated time frame, then the government agencies that are planning to implement development projects should actually go ahead, assuming that environmental clearance has been given and environmental impact assessment is approved. So I live in that sort of a reality. So for me, it's very difficult to really keep on saying yes to all these very sophisticated terminologies. It's very hard reality for us. And I would say that we actually need a very clear law that would reflect the political commitment of the government about their duty to defend the rights of the citizens to clean air. Thank you.
Thank you very much for making that point very clearly, this idea of both rights and duties. I'd like to thank the whole panel once again for their valuable insights, and I'm very much looking forward to following up with all of you collegiately to see what we can do in this region for the peoples of this region. And thank you very much for making yourselves available for this session. And I appreciate you also being available, putting your emails out there so people can contact. And yes, thank you very much. And I'll pass this over now over to Ati. So would you like to take over?
Thanks very much, Jake, and thanks for the panelists. I also realize we are on top of the hour and we can mostly close. I don't want to paraphrase whatever has happened, but like you, I will also say that we'd be very keen to work with all of you and any of you who are interested to build a better case for collaboration in South Asia. A lot of points came forward, the way everybody discussed monitoring and scaling up, and the fact that what is getting monitored is important. The point that Dan made about checking the cycle of what are you doing in terms of action and how is it creating impact, and making sure that more of that is discussed. I mean, at least from an India point of view, we are at a point where in 2 years, the government will have to show 30% reduction from the last 5 years. And we are quite a margin away from how we will be able to show progress and reduction of 30% since 2017 levels. In any case, all of this really points to the fact that there are ways and means already there in which there is actual, genuine, credible collaboration, which is possible across these Asian countries, and certainly something for us to pick and move ahead, at least in terms of bringing this conversation together another time and making sure that we are able to carry forward some of the discussions that were held today and take them to a next level of conclusion or discussion. I don't have more to add. I can only just profusely thank you, and you will have the last word.
Oh, no, I don't want the last word. I just wanted to invite everyone to contact us at ICIMOD. We are very keen to build, development, grow, any word you'd like to choose. But the bottom line is open inboxes and open doors. So please do get in touch with us at ICIMOD.
Thanks very much. We will try and keep this channel open. Somehow we will communicate with the attendees on the presentations and the recordings. But thanks very much, everybody on the panel, for joining us, and thanks to all the participants for tuning in as well. Have a lovely evening. Have a good day, and thanks once again.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Nice to see you.
Thanks.
Everyone. Bye-bye.